So as usual with these sorts of kits, I find that it's easiest to start with the smallest components, and these are of course these passive surface mount components that we've just been looking at. So I've got our 27p marked capacitors here. They've given us 3 of them. That's so we can lose one. Now I'm using just conventional soldering iron and solder. So I just flood it with flux. And position the component. And I always just give a little wiggle and make sure that I can move the circuit board by holding the component. That makes sure that it is properly soldered on. Add a bit more flux. So what I do is I always take the empty packet once I've soldered in all of that value on a board. I take that and put it back in the main bag where the components came from. And then I don't get confused and try and find another place for it. So now we'll come on to this C5. 47p. Now we move on to the neither 47 or 27. And helpfully, they've given us 3.5 of these. So that, I think, is all of the capacitors soldered on. Now we've got resistors. So we've got one here, upside down. We shall find the right one for that. It says 103 or 10K. That's the 102. Those these 103. Now of course it's upside down there. That doesn't matter, it will work fine upside down, but it's nice if you can to get it the right way up so that the next guy can read the value of it. Now we've got this R4. We've got another one up there. So that is all of the little passive surface mount components on the board now. At least all the ones I've been able to notice. If there's any more, we shall come back to it at a later point. And now we're going to move on to these integrated circuits. But I'm going to do this ULN 2803 first, because it's the odd one out. It's a different one to the rest of them. So So this was supplied just completely loose, not in any packaging, not in any protection, anti-static or from physical damage. So hopefully it's okay. So soldering these up is very much like soldering passive components up. They just take a little bit more alignment to try and get everything in place. But just like with the passive component, you would solder up one lead and then double check that everything is aligned. So you do the same with this. And just like if you're directly soldering a dual inline package, such as the microcontroller that we've got a through-hole package, you wouldn't go along each pin in turn soldering them, as it would build up too much heat. It's good to stagger them, so I've done the first two corners. I'm going to flip this round and do the other two corners, and it just helps to reduce the amount of heat that you're putting in to the chip and reduce the amount of potential damage that could be done. It's very easy on this board. As I've done, I just put some solder on a pad that's not belonging to this chip. So in soldering up these sort of SMD chips using a conventional soldering iron, use loads of flux and use less solder than you think is necessary. Because what happens is you end up creating loads of solder bridges. But fortunately, if you've used enough flux, usually those solder bridges are fairly easy to get rid of. And then we just leave that for a minute just to let that cool down before we go on to doing the other side. So what I'll do is I'll just zoom you out a little bit, and then I can angle this board so you can see, hopefully see, maybe turn my light up a little bit. Just that those are all soldered up. It's always worth having a little inspection just to see, have they been soldered in correctly. No bridges. So that went in very straightforwardly. Now the one thing I forgot to mention, although I did pay attention to it, is on the silk screen, as you can see on this outline for the chip, there's a little dimple which indicates the top of the package, and therefore that this is pin 1. And you can just about see it. If I tilt this, you can see the same thing on this one, indicating this is pin 1. Now, on some integrated circuit packages, they will have a corresponding dimple on the actual package. This one doesn't, but it has this little dot or dimple by pin 1. So that lets you know that that is the right way around for that chip. But just something to be aware of, that you could end up very carefully soldering your circuit in, integrated circuit in, and then finding out you've done it the wrong way around. For instance, I bring you this. This is one of these 5, and we're going to start with the one that's next to this because it's probably the most difficult. If I was not so sure of doing these sort of soldering, I would go around and do the others first because they've got better access around them. But I've got used to doing this over the last few projects. So as we can see on this, there's no dimple, but we do have our little dot indicating pin 1. And we know that that's pin 1 because that's the top of the package. Now, I've made things a little bit more difficult for myself because I've got a little bit of solder here. Here doesn't matter so much, but that one, that's what I'll use that pin to solder or to tack it in place first. Then that'll hopefully allow the chip to sit flat. So I won't need to put any extra solder on this, hopefully. So I can't see this properly. I'm looking at this through a monitor, just the same as you're looking through it. You have to keep cleaning your tip, because it tends to get a bit of stale solder on there, and then it just doesn't solder up very well. There's way too much solder on that pin, but it's okay. Corner ones you can get away with it. Silk screen not terribly good on this, coming off with the heat of the soldering iron, but then it is just a cheap kit. I really wish they wouldn't use these matte black circuit boards. Makes filming quite awkward. It makes it look very dark when it's not really, and then you brighten it up to be able to see properly, and then it's too bright. But that seems to be that one in. Just a sanity check that I have put it in the right way with the dot in the right place. They don't give you any extra of these chips, so you've got to be careful when soldering these in. So now I'm just going to zip through the other 4 of these. So to make things awkward, now you've got these 2 kind of facing each other. So that's a little trap just to be aware of. And there we go. So that's pretty much all of the surface mount components installed. I think that is actually all of the surface mount components installed.